Today on the Cohesive Home podcast, I'm giving Melissa a break and interviewing Katrina Onstad, Canadian journalist and author of the recently released book, The Weekend Effect. Her book sums up so many of the ideas that we talk about here at Cohesive Home, and I am thrilled that she's with us today to share her thoughts on taking back your weekend. Thank you so much for joining me, Katrina.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I read through your book right before I had my son, and then I kind of worked through it a little bit again last night. And I just loved so many of the great ideas that you put in it. At this point, I'm wanting to try barefoot running, to shop less, to skip brunch, and connect with my partner more. And I'm thinking I might have to find a place to try ecstatic dance, because that sounded...
Oh, yeah.
very interesting.
I highly recommend the ecstatic dance.
Yes. Well, why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners just a little bit more about your book and also what attracted you to the topic in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a novelist and a journalist, and I'm also a parent, and I'm in a two-career household. And a couple of years ago, my son, who at the time was like 10 or 11, I'd tuck him into bed at night and he would look up at me and say, "Are you kidding?" This was on Sunday nights. And he'd say, "What was that? Was that a weekend? Did that count?" And it, really gave me pause because, of course, lots of people suffer from what they actually call the Sunday night blues or Sunday night letdown. But usually it's because you're sad that the weekend ended. It's not because you are grieving that the weekend never occurred. So I think, I had to really think about this and what was going on in our family and in our lives that we were not rejuvenated on Sunday night. We were not getting that nourishment that one expects and hopes for from a weekend. So I set out to sort of look at the history of the weekend and to understand if other people were experiencing this and what are the circumstances with our relationship between work and leisure that led us to this moment and who's doing it better. So I spent about a year researching and trying out some of the little tricks that I discovered along the way.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, one of the overarching messages that I took away from your book was that our weekends are out of balance because we aren't really in tune with what matters to us. So we either we do too much on the weekend. We overschedule our kids, which means we're overscheduled, or we're spending too much time bringing our work into the weekend, which is something I know I struggle with. So I teach online for a university as well as, run Cohesive Home. And so when my husband is home on the weekend, I'm like, hey, take the kids. I need to work on this project or that.
Yeah.
So what would you recommend for those of us that find ourselves working on the weekend? Why should we try to take the weekend off, and how would that affect our productivity to do so?
Yeah, you've said so much. I mean, you are, as am I, part of the, gig economy, right? Like many people now are in the trenches of insecure work, or we have kind of these patchwork jobs where we work 3 or 4 things, and then we're also sort of tending our brands on social media. And if you're not careful, every minute can start to seem urgently utilitarian. Like we have to, there can't be a second that's not being used for something, right? And I think so many of us experience this. And then, as you say, the weekends, we're kind of playing catch up, not just on our professional lives, but also the domestic stuff that's neglected during the week. So it creates this kind of chaotic kind of experience of the weekend. There are repercussions for this. Like, as you say, it really forced me to reexamine, well, what is my time about? What am I doing with my time? Because we know there's lots of research that tells us that working longer does not actually make you a better worker. That there's not really a correlation between long hours and productivity. In fact, the opposite is true. Shorter hours economies actually do better, and their employees are more productive. So we're caught in this really weird bind where we've come to associate exhaustion and overwork with success, but in fact, that formula doesn't really work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, the weekend, I think we have to sort of return to this idea of really protecting that time if we get it. And it's not, and obviously there's lots of circumstances under which we don't get it. And some people do, we're not all lucky enough to have it. Sometimes it's not even a week. Sometimes it's a Tuesday or a Wednesday night, right? And so we have to be realistic about when that leisure is in the week. Um, but it's so important to really be off at some point in the week, to really disconnect and return to activities that provide some meaning and some purpose and have like lasting benefits.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why, I keep seeing online all these articles about taking, a digital Sabbath or detox or a weekend
Yeah.
break or whatever it's called, where, you disconnect for the weekend.
Hmm.
And, with the way our technology is today, something that I read in your book was the need for socializing in person and having those face-to-face connections. So you talked about your parents and how they would entertain and have the long leisurely dinner parties. And I
Yeah.
think, the weekend rolls around, I'm so tired. How do I add in those social connections with friends and family? And
I know.
so,
Yeah.
how do we do that?
Oh, it's hard, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Mm-hmm.
God, we are at once so connected, more connected than we've ever been, and also really not connected at all, right? It's funny because we can have these really thriving digital networks and we feel that we're sort of up on the news of our friends and that maybe that's sufficient. But in fact, it takes face to face human connection to actually forge relationships. And all the research tells us that at end of life, when people are asked to evaluate their lives and what brought them happiness. Nobody says status, acquisition, my stuff, my money. What they say is relationships. It was
Mm-hmm.
those people, being with the people I love, giving of myself, being out in the world, having an identity outside of work. But all of that takes time. And when we're so time crunched, or we feel that we don't have any time, then when do we get to actually tend those relationships? And when do we actually get to congregate? I mean, that was the original idea of the weekend, right? It was the Sabbath. And so people would, Judeo Christianity come together in a church or in a synagogue, and Islam has this on Friday. And that just very simple idea kind of created a scaffolding for the weekend that would force people into human contact. And now, with secularization, we just don't have many people don't have that built-in structure. And what often takes the place of that time in the weekend is work, right? Like work kind of
Right.
substitutes, or even Facebook will substitute for human contact. But I mean, it's so important. And I feel this too, like this, my parents were very social. They remained very social, my mother particularly. And their weekends were really full. They also did work on weekends, I should say, but their house was full and busy, and it didn't have to be perfect. And I think we sometimes put such pressure on ourselves to cultivate the perfect dinner party or the perfect social event that we're just crippled. We don't do anything,
Right. Well, yeah, and I mean, there's so much pressure online, like Instagram and Pinterest to
Yeah,
have, these beautiful, perfect homes, and so like you said, we're afraid to have people over if it doesn't look a certain way,
yeah,
and also that kind of fuels this whole economy of shopping, and like you said in the book, working to spend and getting
hmm,
stuck into that cycle.
yeah. Well, this is so much about what you guys are doing with Cohesive Home, right? Like, how do
Right.
we
Hmm.
strip back to what actually matters in our lives, and how did
Yes.
we get into this work spend trap? And that's a great phrase and idea from this economist Juliet Shore, which is this that we work so we have money to spend, and then we've spent so much so we have to work, right? We get this kind of
Right.
hamster
Right.
wheel of consumption and production. And that's, there's your time suck. Like there's your weekend every weekend. And also shopping can pass as recreation now, right? Like shopping is one of the top tourist activities. It's not visiting
Wow.
museums, it's shopping, right? So like you get a holiday, which should be this really, rejuvenating break, and people hit outlet malls and stuff. And then at the end of it, they're like, I don't really feel so relaxed because the there's not a lot of lasting, there's instant gratification sometimes from shopping. We all like to shop from here, for fun now and then. But if that's your weekend, weekend after weekend, you're not going to get those lasting effects that, more beneficial activities would bring.
Yes, especially when you go shopping and then you look at the receipt afterward, or you look at your bank statements and you're like, oh, I didn't realize that I
Yeah.
spent this much, or maybe I didn't actually need these items. But
Yeah.
then it just creates that necessity, like you said, to continue the work cycle and to work
Hmm.
more to kind of to keep it moving along. Well, okay, so if we are cutting back on the shopping and the work, and many of our listeners have children. Not all, but we do have a pretty strong base of families. How do we tackle the issue of kids and all of their extracurriculars, or should we? Should we have them enrolled in lots of different activities? Is it beneficial to their future
Hmm.
to seek out those opportunities? What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, it's such a struggle, and we deal with this all the time. We live in such a funny moment with parenting. Like, we're on one hand so devoted, and we're, so many of us are trying to curate these really amazing childhoods for our kids, and like, it comes from such a place of love, right? And especially if you live in a place where these are all these incredible activities on hand and available. Like, when I was a kid, we didn't have filmmaking classes down the street.
Right.
Enriched baby salsa or whatever your thing is, you can
Yes.
find it, right?
Everything's available now.
Everything
Right.
is available now. And so you see your kid and it's like this blank slate, and you think, I want to expose him or her to everything. And so, those are good intentions, but there can come a point where you step back and look and think, oh my God, like with my son, the weekends were just filled with organized, structured activities and being schlepped from play date to play date. And the transportation is often involved. That's another big drain on time on the weekend, right? So, if it's feeling overwhelming and the weekends are not, giving you what you need, so desperately need to get through the rest of the week, then I think looking at the schedules of our families is a really good place to start. I mean, that's actually been huge for us, to just kind of sit down and consciously make a decision. Like, they don't have to do everything. In fact, they can't do everything. And in not doing everything, we're actually presenting them with an opportunity to be bored, which is incredibly stressful, right? And to explore
Yes.
the world and be out there kind of meandering. And rather than us kind of imposing our, like, kid culture agenda on them, they can maybe, in that open, unoccupied time on the weekend, figure out what turns them on and like what they're into, right? And that's something I think for a lot of us who grew up a generation ago, or, I'm probably like 10 or 15 years older than you, like, we really were off the grid. I mean, there was no, right? And of course, I didn't appreciate that at the time, but I think there was something really profound in not being tracked by my parents, and
Right.
having
Yes.
that freedom to make mistakes and be out in the world. And like, by being bored is how I found out I wanted to write for a living, because there was nothing to do. So I
Yes.
picked up a pen and was like, oh my God, I love this, and I think if my parents had said, look, she's showing proclivity towards writing, let's put her in 5 advanced writing courses, I don't know, or if my relationship with it would have remained the same, right? So it's a tough thing to say to your kid, and especially to push back against the parenting culture, which is so strong, which is again kind of a corporate model of like success. Like, what are you doing to make your kids successful? But they're children, right? And we're kind of imposing an adult measure of success on them. Like, are they ahead? Are they ahead in sports? They can't just go play house league. They have to play select because they got to be the best. Or they have to take another, or they got to take an extra language course, more tutors. Like, and sometimes some of these things are necessary and some of them are great, but if they're becoming all consuming, I think we're removing something like a really important facet of their childhoods from them with all of our good intentions. When another, really good way to look at parenting is like, what happens if it's alone? Then what? What's all the possibility in that aloneness or in that separation, or in them just gathering with neighborhood kids and finding their own kind of unstructured play. So I think that's really, it's difficult to rebel against this moment, but I do think it's really helpful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I used to teach on campus for the university that I currently teach for,
Mm,
and I would get so many students that were just completely burnt out,
right.
that had gone through, our kind of the modern schooling system, which has its own expectations and demands,
Yeah.
as well as all the extracurriculars, and then they would just get to college and they would just be done. They were
Yeah.
there because their parents wanted them to, but
Yeah.
they weren't owning
Yeah.
it. They weren't very engaged. So I agree with you. It is important to let our children be bored, to give them space to figure out what it is that they're truly excited
Hmm.
about and what they want to pursue, instead of maybe pushing our own agenda or our
Yeah.
own insecurities about what childhood should look like onto them.
And our own anxiety about free time, right? Like
Yes.
many adults are not good at the downtime. As we started off talking about, just like you see an hour in your calendar and you think, I got to fill it. Like, what's that? That's not useful. I'm a loser. Or, we saw culture so venerates busyness and being occupied. And so if we're kind of projecting that onto our kids, if we look at an empty afternoon as a sign of failure or something, right? And
Yes.
it's very unfair to do to them.
Yes. Well, yeah, because I think, we model what's appropriate behavior, whether it's, with our technology or with our schedules. And so, yeah, you're so right on that. It is important to show them that, it's okay to just relax, to
Yeah.
have some leisure time, and to not constantly be moving. So
Hmm.
something my husband and I have tried to do is to quit saying hurry up to our kids.
Oh, that's so interesting. How does that work?
Right. Um,
Can you get them to do what you need them
no, no, because I fail at it all the time, but I realized it was like, I wasn't building in the time that they needed to transition. So I
to?
have a
Okay.
6 year old and a 3 year old, and then obviously a newborn.
Right.
And as a parent yourself, 3 year olds and 6 year olds don't move exactly very quickly, unless,
Those are
there's
the
ice
hurry up
cream.
years. Yeah.
Right. There's some kind of reward. And so, yeah, I realized, wow, I'm telling them to hurry up all the time. And,
Interesting.
like, what is that saying about our time? Yes. So
So
definitely
how does it
slowing
work?
down.
Has it been successful? Like so do you find if you just build in a little extra time, then you don't have to rush the moment? Is that and it works?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I try to. Yeah. I try to give them kind of like warnings of when we're going to be transitioning to something else. It doesn't always work,
Right,
but
right.
right. We're all work in progress as
Absolutely. But I like that very
parents.
much.
Well, there you go. Okay, so if we are cutting back on the extracurriculars with our kids, and you mentioned a couple times about, our kids being able to just go out and, play outside with friends or to be out in nature. And I've really appreciated your story about the year that you spent in what was it, the outdoor exploration
Yeah.
program for your high school.
Yeah.
So, what do you recommend with connecting to nature, to like why we should try and spend some time in nature on the weekends? What are the benefits?
Yeah, yeah. So that in that chapter, I talked about being when I was 16, did a year long, just through the local public school program that was sort of like outward bound for teenagers. And, I was kind of a grumpy, gothy, like Smith listening teenager and reluctantly did this. And it was really profound, remains so to this day. And I think what it was just getting out of my head, as an
Yes.
urban kid, like very caught up in popular culture, and to realize that there were other parts of myself that were powerful and could be tested in the world, and how self sufficient I could be, and also beauty. Like I mean, I'm from British Columbia, and it's a very beautiful place, and I kind of knew that, but it wasn't until I like slept in an ice cave that I really,
It's just so
got
cool, by the
oh,
way.
it was amazing. Like I'm still so
Fascinating.
proud of that, and
Yes.
so now obviously like I live right downtown in a major city in Toronto, and as most of the world is in urban environments now, and we're becoming very cut off from the natural world. It's very easy to become cut off from the natural world, and there are very serious repercussions from that, right? Like mental health issues, increased anxiety, health, physical health, obesity. So this to me was a real key to the good weekend, was absolutely forcing some kind of moment in the natural world, and being really, really vigilant about that. Um, and I think what helped us, was kind of lowering our standards for it, because I think because I have a slightly outdoorsy background, I thought, well, if I'm not, hiking up the nearest mountain, then I
Right.
don't have, my
What's
carabiners,
the
then
point?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I'll just stay here and watch Netflix. But in fact, like I spoke with this woman who's an ecotherapist in Berkeley. It was so interesting, and this is a really burgeoning area of therapy, which is so simple, and it's actually proving to be really effective, which is getting people out into the green. Um, has immediate psychological benefits. So, with her, she counseled me and just said, it doesn't have to be dramatic. Like, you can go to your local park and develop a relationship with something in nature. So, which I really loved this idea. At first, I thought it was just really poetic, this idea that you would go to the same place and return there and see how the seasons had affected it. So, there's like one tree in the big park that's only a couple of blocks from my house, and I have a dog. So I'm always checking out that tree, and it kind of checks me, like, okay, this, there's so much stress and, strife in the world. This tree continues, and it's blooming now, and now it's shedding its leaves, and I find it incredibly calming. And I know that it is. Like, I know that if I'm stressed and I can kind of get to my tree, it's actually going to help. But it's so
It's your
simple.
touch point,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, that was something that when I interviewed people who do have good weekends, nature often came up. It really came up. It's a very simple one. And I think if we can kind of frame it in a way that's utilitarian, like reasonable for our lives, then, and lose that intimidation factor, I think it's something that most of us hopefully can integrate even in urban environments.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that, if you're familiar with the book by Richard Louv
Yes.
about,
Oh my God.
right? Just such a great resource. And, he talked about what you just mentioned about kind of this place based connection that we get to know wherever we live. We find that patch of green, for our children and for ourselves. We don't have to go to the mountains, which
Right.
would be nice if we could,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the little patch of green will do.
Yeah, it's primal,
So,
right? I mean, we can't, it's in our blood to want to get back to the land. Yeah.
yes, yes, absolutely. Well, what's just one simple step or some encouragement that you could give our listeners to regain some control over their weekend? What's just one thing that they could try?
Um, okay. I think lowering our standards on the domestic front is incredibly freeing, like emotionally, and also freeing of our time. So, and this is another thing that I'm still working on.
Yeah, right. Aren't we all?
Yeah, right. Because we want our homes to be comfortable and clean and
Yes.
everything, but it's very easy to lose an entire weekend to the deep clean. And every once in a while, you have to, right? You just can't live with it,
Of
and fair enough.
course.
Um, and some people have said to me, like, well, you just farm it out, like you pay someone. But to me, that's not a really realistic solution for most people. If you can,
It isn't
like,
right.
yeah, But the other, perhaps the more realistic thing to do for many of us is to try and get stuff done during the week, even if it's unpleasant. Like, I have
Mhm.
tried now, because I need to have like a clean bathroom for the weekend. Is my
Yeah.
obsession.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Especially
right.
with
Like,
kids.
exactly, and so I'm trying to do that. Or, like, well, first of all, I'm trying to bring my kids into a lot more of this. They're older now, so they're vacuuming and doing more stuff. So it's
Which is
off
so
me.
great, isn't it?
Right? It's the best. And they, you know what?
Yes.
They're learning stuff. They're self-reliant. Like, I'm into it. I want
Mm-hmm.
them to go out into the world being good roommates for whoever
Absolutely.
whoever
Absolutely.
they're with, right? And also, of course, my partner. And so, the division of labor in a household is always can often be contentious. And so we're always working on that too, so that it doesn't just fall on me, as it often does fall on the woman, right? But yeah, if I can get that bathroom clean on like a Wednesday or Thursday, then I feel, then I've got some time. I've held back a little bit of time. And if I don't, then can I say to myself, I'm skipping it this weekend? I just, because I'm making a choice. You can't always, right? But I think it's really when people say like, well, what's the tip? Like the tip is kind of applicable to almost everything, which is just like be fierce about your time off. Like be as protective of your leisure as you are, and as good at and as efficient with your leisure as you are at your work. Because so many of us we're good employees and we're loyal and we put our all into our work lives. But are you doing the same for the rest of your life? Like, what is your how is your off doing? Are you tending the
Yes.
same care and the same diligence? And is it as much of a priority? Are your relationships a priority? Is your community, is the world outside of your door? Does it matter? Does it get as much time as your work? And if your work is the thing that's kind of pushing, if your needle is always tilted towards labor rather than leisure, then you're going to miss out on a lot, right? So, yeah, like maybe the toilet can wait. Maybe it can. Maybe it can.
I think it definitely can. I know mine is looking pretty grungy right now, so
I
I am totally on board with that advice.
Okay, good. Then just leave it. Leave it till the next week.
Right, exactly. Well, that is such good advice. I think that's something that we try and suggest within the cohesive home community is if you're overwhelmed, have less and do
Yeah,
less because
exactly.
those are the easiest steps to kind of regaining your time. So I'm so glad that you touched on that.
Yeah, have less and do less is pretty much it, right? Because the have less
Hmm.
also brings us back to that idea of work and consumption. So if you're
Right,
not, interested in acquisition, then maybe you won't have to work quite as long, right? And
right.
just any step that you can take to free that time will also free you, as a person.
Hmm. Absolutely, yes. It's just, as you know, it's so hard to do today in
I
the kind of
know.
the way that our society is structured, but I think it's a worthy goal.
I do too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Katrina, for joining me today. It was such a pleasure to talk about your book, The Weekend Effect.
Yeah, well, you're in the
And
book, so
I know,
everyone needs to read it because your wonderful story about how actually enshrined some of these
right?
ideas in your life, and it's such a fascinating thing that you guys are doing, and so admirable. So bravo.
Oh, thank you so much, Katrina. I'm so glad that we were, able to connect. And, I felt like I learned so many new things from your book. So for those of you listening, make sure to pick up a copy of Katrina's book anywhere that books are sold. You can also find it on our website, cohesivehome.com, under our shop, which you can find under the Start Here tab at cohesivehome.com. Thank you so much for listening today, and I'll see you next time.